What if the smallest act of kindness, one loaf of warm, homemade bread, could save the most powerful woman in the city, and shatter the life of the man who gave it? Before this story breaks your heart, heals it, and twists it beyond anything you expect, subscribe now, because stories like this don't just entertain, they change how you see people, power, love, and survival. Stay with us till the end. You will never forget what she did after taking him home. On the coldest morning Chicago had seen in years, when the wind cut through coats like razors and the sky hung low and gray over the south side, Marcus Hill stood outside the subway entrance with a battered wooden crate at his feet, a hand-painted sign leaning against it, and the smell of fresh bread rising like a quiet prayer into the freezing air. He was black, 34, broad-shouldered but worn down by life, with hands rough from years of factory work and eyes that had learned how to watch the world without asking it for anything. The sign read simply, "Homemade bread. $1 a loaf. Fresh today." No pity words, no story, no explanation. He didn't like begging. He never had. What he liked was work, honest work, even if the world had stopped offering him much of it. He had woken up at 3 that morning in the one-room apartment he shared with his 6-year-old daughter, Ava, kneaded dough quietly so he wouldn't wake her, baked the loaves in a borrowed oven downstairs, and wrapped them in brown paper before the sun even thought about rising. Bread was something his grandmother had taught him how to make back in Mississippi, something that lasted when money didn't, something that filled the stomach and the heart at the same time. And today, like every weekday, he hoped to sell enough to buy groceries, pay part of the electric bill, and maybe, if luck leaned his way, put aside a few dollars for Ava's school trip that she pretended not to care about but talked about in her sleep. Across the street, a black luxury sedan rolled to a stop, its windows tinted, its engine humming like a restrained animal. Inside sat Elena Cross, CEO of Crosswell Industries, a woman whose name moved markets, whose decisions closed factories and opened others, whose face appeared on magazine covers framed by headlines about innovation, discipline, and ruthless success. At 38, she was thin to the point of fragility, her tailored coat hanging off her like it belonged to someone else, her collarbones sharp, her cheeks hollow despite the makeup applied by professionals every morning. The driver glanced at her through the rearview mirror, concern flickering briefly before he looked away again. Elena hadn't eaten in 3 days. Not because there was no food, her penthouse kitchen was stocked by a private chef, but because eating felt like losing control, like weakness, like failure. Food had become the enemy years ago, back when praise followed every pound she lost and power followed every sacrifice she made. Hunger was clarity, hunger was control, hunger was proof that she was stronger than her body. She was on her way to a board meeting that would decide the fate of thousands of employees when something unexpected happened. The car slowed not because of traffic, but because the driver noticed her staring out the window, her gaze locked on a man holding bread like it was something sacred. "Ma'am?" he asked. She didn't answer. The smell, real or imagined, slipped through the sealed car like a memory. Warm yeast, salt, heat, home. Her stomach clenched painfully, a sharp protest she had trained herself to ignore, but this time it was different. Her vision blurred slightly, the city tilted, she hadn't planned to stop. She never stopped for things like this. But her hand lifted, almost on its own. "Pull over," she said quietly. The driver hesitated. "Ma'am, we're already running." "Pull over," she repeated, steel entering her voice. The car obeyed. Marcus noticed her when the car door opened, noticed the way people always did when wealth stepped into their space, the pause, the shift, the awareness. She stood there for a moment, impossibly elegant and impossibly thin, her heels sinking slightly into dirty snow, her eyes fixed not on him but on the bread. He straightened without thinking, wiped his hands on his jeans. "Morning," he said, voice steady, respectful, not curious. She swallowed. "Is it fresh?" she asked. Her voice surprised her. It sounded small. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied. "Baked a few hours ago." She nodded, reached into her coat, pulled out a $100 bill without looking. "I'll take one." He blinked. "It's $1. I know." She held the bill out anyway. He hesitated, then gently pushed it back toward her. "I can't make change for that," he said. "And I don't charge that much." Something flickered across her face. Shock, maybe, or something like shame. Slowly, she pulled out a 5 instead. "Keep the rest," she said. He handed her the loaf, warm even through the paper. Their fingers brushed accidentally, and something strange passed between them, not electricity, not romance, but recognition. Pain saw pain. Hunger saw hunger. Elena walked a few steps away, unwrapped the bread, and tore off a small piece. Her hand shook. The first bite broke something open inside her. Not pleasure, relief. Her body reacted before her mind could argue, warmth spreading, tears stinging her eyes as flavor filled her mouth, simple and real and grounding. She leaned against the car, breathing hard, eating slowly, then faster, ignoring the driver's alarmed stare. Marcus watched without staring, his heart tightening in a way he didn't fully understand. He'd seen hunger before, real hunger, the kind that lived behind expensive clothes and hollow smiles. When she finished half the loaf, she stopped suddenly, fear crashing back in. She looked at the remaining bread like it was a weapon. I can't, she whispered, more to herself than to him. Marcus spoke before thinking. You don't have to finish it, he said gently. Bread ain't a test, it's just food. She laughed once, sharp and broken. You don't know me. No, he agreed. But I know bread. Something in that simple sentence cracked the armor she'd spent decades building. She looked at him then, really looked. The tired lines around his eyes. The dignity in his posture. The calm strength. What's your name? She asked. Marcus. Elena. She hesitated, then did something no one around her ever expected. Will you come with me? The driver stiffened. Marcus frowned slightly. Where? Breakfast, she said. Real breakfast. I don't want to eat alone. He almost laughed. The idea was absurd. A CEO asking a street vendor to breakfast. I can't, he said. I've got more loaves to sell. She glanced at the crate, then pulled out her phone, made a call without asking permission. This is Elena Cross, she said calmly. I need a catering truck sent to this location. Buy every loaf this man has. Pay him triple. Yes. Now. She hung up and met his stunned gaze. Now you can. An hour later, Marcus sat across from her in a quiet private dining room overlooking the river, the rest of the world sealed away by glass and silence. Plates of food sat between them, eggs, fruit, toast, but only the bread moved. Elena ate slowly, shakily, with effort and tears she didn't bother hiding. Marcus didn't comment. He told her about Ava, about losing his job when the plant closed, about learning to bake again to survive. She listened like no one had listened to him in years. When she told him about the control, the fear, the endless pressure to be perfect, he didn't try to fix her. He just nodded. When breakfast ended, she did the unbelievable thing. She looked at him and said, "Come home with me. Not for sex, not for charity. I need to remember how to live. And your bread, did something no doctor has been able to do." Marcus should have said no. Every instinct warned him, but then he thought of Ava, of rent, of dignity, of doors that never opened. And somehow, impossibly, this one had. He nodded, and that decision would change everything. The penthouse sat above the city like a different country, all glass and steel and silence, the kind of place Marcus had only ever seen on television when shows tried to convince people that loneliness looked glamorous. As the private elevator rose, his ears popped and his nerves tightened, not from fear of heights but from the weight of stepping into a world that had never been built for men like him. Elena stood beside him, arms folded tightly around herself, suddenly smaller than she had seemed on the street, her confidence dimmed now that the decision had been made. When the doors opened, warm light spilled out, revealing a space so clean it almost felt unreal, white marble floors, minimalist furniture, a kitchen that looked untouched despite its perfection. It smelled faintly of lemon polish and something sterile, like a hospital trying too hard to feel like home. "Make yourself comfortable," Elena said, though her voice lacked conviction. Marcus nodded, carefully setting his jacket over the back of a chair as if afraid to wrinkle something invisible. He didn't sit at first. He walked slowly, respectfully, like a guest in a museum. Every instinct told him to stay alert. Men like him didn't come to places like this unless they were being used, tested, or erased. Elena watched him from the kitchen island, her chest tight with a feeling she hadn't felt in years, anticipation that wasn't tied to conquest or control, but to hope. She moved toward the fridge, opened it, stared inside at the perfectly arranged containers prepared by staff. Her hands trembled. "I don't usually keep bread here," she said quietly, almost apologetically. Marcus shrugged gently. "That's okay. Bread ain't magic. It's just honest." She smiled weakly. "You keep saying things like that." They sat eventually, not close, not far, just two people sharing space without knowing the rules. Elena poured water, then surprised herself by pouring juice too, ignoring the voice in her head screaming numbers and consequences. She took a sip, winced, then laughed softly at herself. "My doctors would faint if they saw this." "Doctors don't live in your body," Marcus replied. The words landed heavier than he intended. She stared at him, then looked away. They think I'm recovering, she admitted. I tell them I eat. I tell them I'm fine. Her fingers tightened around the glass. I'm not. Marcus didn't respond right away. He thought of Ava, of how she hid her fears behind smiles, of how adults did the same thing but with better words. You don't look fine, he said calmly. You look tired of fighting yourself. Something in her broke then, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a quiet, devastating way. Tears slid down her face without warning. She covered her mouth, embarrassed, furious with herself. No one saw her like this. No one was allowed to. Marcus didn't move toward her, didn't touch her, didn't offer platitudes. He simply said, "You don't have to explain anything to me." That made it worse. She cried harder, shoulders shaking, years of control unraveling in the presence of a man who had nothing to gain from her collapse. When it passed, when her breathing slowed, she wiped her face and straightened, shame flooding in. I'm sorry, she said. This was a mistake. I shouldn't have brought you here. Marcus met her eyes steadily. If you want me to go, I will. But crying don't make you weak. It means something inside you still wants to live. The days that followed blurred into something neither of them had expected. Elena asked Marcus to stay, just a few days, she said. To cook, to talk, to exist. She paid him generously, too generously, but he negotiated boundaries like a man who'd learned the cost of dependency. I'll stay, he said, but I'm not your employee here. And I go home every night to my daughter. She agreed immediately, almost desperately. Ava met Elena on the third day, shy but curious, clutching her backpack and eyeing the penthouse like a palace. Elena knelt to her level without thinking, ignoring the ache in her knees. Your dad makes the best bread I've ever tasted, she said honestly. Ava smiled proudly. He makes it when he's sad, she replied. The words struck Elena like a blow. Sadness baked into survival, love kneaded into necessity. But the world outside the penthouse did not pause for healing. News broke quietly at first, whispers of the CEO's absence, rumors of erratic behavior, board members growing nervous. Elena's assistant called repeatedly. Elena ignored it, until she couldn't. When she finally answered, the tone shifted. They're questioning your stability, the assistant warned. They're saying you've changed. Elena laughed bitterly after hanging up. Changed, she repeated. That's what terrifies them. Marcus watched her pace, saw the old armor trying to reassemble itself. You don't owe them your suffering, he said. She stopped, looked at him sharply. They don't see it that way. To them, my illness is an asset, as long as it keeps me sharp and obedient. The next twist came like a knife wrapped in silk. One evening, Elena revealed the truth she'd been hiding. The board has been pushing a merger, she said quietly. One that will shut down 3 factories. Marcus froze. Where? She swallowed. South Side, including the one you worked at. Silence fell heavy between them. The bread on the counter cooled, forgotten. So my job paid for your stock price, Marcus said slowly. It wasn't accusation, it was realization. Elena flinched. I didn't know it was yours, she whispered. But yes, I signed it. Pain flared in his chest, sharp and old. Every eviction notice, every night he went hungry so Ava wouldn't. All connected to the woman standing in front of him. You took my livelihood, he said. And now you're taking my kindness. She shook her head violently. No, I'm trying to give something back. You can't buy forgiveness with meals and money, he replied. The words hurt both of them. That night, Marcus didn't stay. He left early, hugging Ava tighter than usual. Elena sat alone in the penthouse, staring at the untouched bread, realizing for the first time that healing without justice was just another lie. The next morning, she did something that would shake the city. She called an emergency board meeting and announced she was reversing the merger, publicly, unapologetically, citing ethical responsibility and personal accountability. The backlash was immediate. Stocks dipped. Investors panicked. The media went wild. Headlines screamed about an unstable CEO influenced by personal entanglements. And then they discovered Marcus. Photos surfaced. A black single father. A street bread seller. Accusations flew. Exploitation. Manipulation. Gold digging. Elena watched the narrative twist him into a villain and felt something she hadn't felt in years, rage that wasn't strategic but protective. She stood at the podium the next day, cameras flashing, and said the words no one expected. If compassion is a weakness, then I accept it. And if standing with the people harmed by my decisions costs me this position, then it's a price I'm willing to pay. By nightfall, her resignation was demanded. And Marcus, watching from his small apartment, realized that by giving her bread, he hadn't just fed a woman, he'd ignited a war. By the time dawn broke over Chicago, the city was already choosing sides. Talk radio buzzed with anger and disbelief, financial analysts debated Elena Cross's collapse, and social media devoured Marcus Hill whole, dissecting his past, his poverty, his race, his motives, as if a man without power could only exist as a threat. Outside his apartment building, a news van idled, cameras pointed upward like accusing fingers. Marcus kept the curtains drawn and the TV off, sitting at the small kitchen table while Ava colored quietly beside him, unaware that her father's life had been cracked open for the world to examine. He felt guilt gnawing at him, not for accepting Elena's help, but for the cost she was paying because of him. Bread was supposed to heal. He had never imagined it could burn everything down. Elena, meanwhile, stood alone in her penthouse, the silence louder than any boardroom. Overnight, her access had been restricted, her company email locked, her authority reduced to a press statement and a carefully worded exit agreement she hadn't signed. The old voice in her head, the one that thrived on control and punishment, rose again, whispering that she deserved this, that she should disappear, shrink, starve herself back into numb obedience. She walked into the kitchen, opened a cabinet, and found the last loaf Marcus had baked, wrapped neatly in brown paper. She pressed it to her chest, breathing in the familiar scent, grounding herself. "Not today," she whispered. She tore off a piece and ate, slowly, deliberately, choosing survival as rebellion. The unbelievable things she did came next, not announced, not staged, not approved by anyone. She left the penthouse, walked past security, past reporters shouting her name, and drove herself to the south side. No driver, no entourage, just her and a decision that would redefine her life. When she knocked on Marcus's door, he opened it cautiously, tension etched into his face. "You shouldn't be here," he said immediately. "They'll follow you." "I know," she replied. "That's why I came." Ava peeked from behind his leg, recognition lighting her face. "Bread lady," she said. Elena smiled, eyes shining. "Hi, Ava." Inside the cramped apartment, Elena sat on a chair that wobbled slightly, hands folded in her lap, a billionaire reduced to a guest in a space built on resilience rather than wealth. "I resigned," she said simply. Marcus stared at her. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," she said firmly. "I did." She explained everything, the board's ultimatum, the narrative they were spinning, the future they wanted her to crawl back to. "I won't," she said. "I won't live by starving myself or others ever again." Marcus felt a strange mix of awe and fear. "They'll destroy you," he said. "They already tried," she answered. "I'm still standing." What followed was not a fairy tale romance but something far more radical. Elena moved out of the penthouse and into a modest rented townhouse a few blocks from Marcus's place, shocking tabloids and investors alike. She invested her remaining severance not in another corporation, but in a cooperative, one that reopened the closed factories under worker ownership, starting with the very plant Marcus had lost. He refused the leadership position she offered. "I'll work," he said. "But I won't be your symbol." She respected that. Together, they built something quieter than power but stronger, community kitchens that sold bread at cost, recovery programs that treated eating disorders without shame, jobs that paid dignity instead of promises. The world didn't forgive easily. Hate mail arrived, threats followed. Some nights Elena sat at Marcus's kitchen table, shaking, fighting the urge to disappear back into control and hunger. Marcus sat with her, baking bread through the night, teaching her how to knead dough, how to feel when it was ready, how to trust the process instead of forcing it. "You can't rush rising," he'd say. "And you can't punish it either." Slowly, her body healed. Slowly, her mind followed. Love came later, not explosive, not dramatic, but steady, chosen daily, built on respect and shared scars. Years later, when reporters asked Elena what saved her, she didn't mention money or therapy or resignations. She told them about a poor black single dad who sold bread outside a subway station, about how his kindness reminded her that survival wasn't about control but connection. When they asked Marcus what changed his life, he looked at Ava, healthy, laughing, unafraid, and said, "I learned that even the smallest thing you give can come back and change the world. But only if you give it without asking to be saved yourself." And somewhere in Chicago, every morning, the smell of fresh bread still rose into the cold air. Not as charity, not as miracle, but as proof that healing, like dough, only works when it's shared.